next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the Columnist, Yasmin Alibhai-Brown, and broadcaster and psychotherapist, Lucy Beresford. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. With the arrest and suspension of Labour MP Dan Norris in connection with allegations of rape and child sex offences is lead story in the Mail on Sunday. That story is also lead item in tomorrow's Sunday Telegraph. The Mirror too makes MP Dan Norris's arrest its main front page item. The Observer says Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has ordered a major rethink of government economic policy in case Donald Trump's trade tariffs do lasting damage to the UK. The Express has been speaking to experts and warns in an exclusive that a so-called Iron Dome defence system will not protect the UK from any Russian missile attack. While The Times reports that Russian sensors designed to gather information about British nuclear submarines have been found in UK territorial waters. The People goes with cannabis farms apparently being operated by British people on an island used for the filming of the TV series White Lotus. The Sun carries what it says is an attack by Strictly Come Dancing's Craig Revel-Horwood on his fellow judges, insisting that he is the only one who matters. And finally, The Star has a poll which finds that a quarter of Brits have fallen out with their partner over their dress sense. The headline, "You're not going out like that." Interesting headline. We're joined tonight by Yasmin Alibhai-Brown and Lucy Beresford, both superbly dressed, if I may say so. Let's start with, not with The Star, but with The Times front page and the story that Sir Keir Starmer is admitting that globalisation has failed. This as the tariff war rages imposed by Donald Trump. Yasmin.
Yeah, I mean, I just never get... I cannot get into Keir Starmer's head. Because when you say things like globalisation has failed, global trade has been going on since the first boats went out from this land in the 16th century, whenever it was. You can't say something has failed just because one man in America is doing some devastating stuff. So it's a weird thing to say. And then goes on to say, yeah, we are in a new era. It's a really difficult situation. I can't underestimate it. I'm not a Prime Minister. But it's the simplistic way in which he sometimes speaks that kind of bothers me a lot when it's a very complex world dilemma we're all in. What we need is more global cooperation, not less.
Lucy?
Yeah, I think it's a very disappointing statement from Keir Starmer. I think that Donald Trump... Well, if you were being charitable, you would say that he was trying to speak to a very particular part of his electorate. But if you were not being charitable, you would say that he didn't understand economics at all. Yeah. And my worry is that Keir Starmer is now colluding with him in this idea that globalisation has failed. What Keir Starmer should be doing is getting out there on the front foot and actually rebutting a lot of this, and actually pointing out that the American economy in particular has been outperforming the economies of the G7 countries for at least the last 20 years, if not 30 years. So the idea that people in America have not benefited from global trade is just a fallacy. And, OK, so I'm not, you know, sitting by my swimming pool in my bikini, sipping a Negroni saying, you know, this doesn't matter. It does matter. It matters to people's livelihoods. The cost of living crisis was pretty horrendous before this all kicked off. But what we don't want is Keir Starmer saying, oh, yes, actually, I agree with you. I think actually that globalisation has failed and lots of people have been left behind. Now, the really interesting dimension to that is that actually a lot of people who voted for Brexit did feel that they had been left behind. But they hadn't necessarily been left behind by an economy which was actually so much better than it was in the 1970s and 1980s. And when Keir Starmer comes out and talks similar drivel like this, I really worry, because I want someone to be much more robust.
And Yasmin, also, I think this is addressing his permanent anxiety about reform voters. And he's using language which I think, appeals to them, you know. The migration comes into everything he now says, and also close the borders. You can't do that. And it's just so economically, as Lucy says, we need better better leadership than cowardice. And,
but is it that he's walking this tightrope where he doesn't want to be seen to disagree with President Trump, which thus far seems to have worked
yeah, but
to
not
his benefit
disagreeing.
with the lowest tariff rates.
It's not quite the same as
UK.
colluding. And it is very interesting on the front page of The Observer, which I know we're sort of also going to have a look at, which is that what clearly not just Keir Starmer, but leaders from countries around the world are frantically trying to work out what they should be doing. And there is this awful euphemism that's being used at the moment, reported in The Observer, which says that Keir Starmer, according to allies, feels that the old assumptions should be discarded, which basically means we might have to raise some taxes. Why are they not speaking plain English? Why can they not trust the electorate to actually see what's happening globally?
But when he
and
says the
respond
old
to that?
assumptions need to be disregarded, doesn't he mean that the world order has been changed by Donald Trump?
Not according to The Observer, it doesn't.
We can't see them as necessarily an ally anymore.
According to The Observer, it's basically suggesting that he and the Chancellor are trying to brace the nation for the idea that they may have to raise taxes again, despite having promised not to do so. So absolutely, that whole idea of walking that tightrope between definitely not wanting to annoy Donald Trump. Don't forget, we've got the Queen, the invite from the King. The rumours are that, in fact, that invite has been upgraded to a stay at Balmoral and things like that. We have got ways in which we can stroke that ego, but you don't have to go so far that you actually run the risk of making it difficult for your own people at home. And we need him to be much more robust.
And, this 10%, he's saying it today. He's so whimsical. He's so unreliable, Trump. OK? There's no way you can trust him. And to behave as if we're a colony of the United States is ironic, is it not? That's how we're behaving. We're the undeclared 51
the vassal
state.
state.
Yeah. Awful.
Interesting point of view on that. Let's move on from international politics. We're going to have a look at the Telegraph now. And this story of the mother that was jailed for the Southport tweet or X post in which she basically incited the setting on fire of asylum hotels, and she spoke of mass deportations. Suella Braverman's come out saying that, it was really heavy-handed that she was jailed for this and it should be reviewed. Lucy?
Yeah, I'm very interested that Suella Braverman's done this, actually, because the topic of sentencing guidelines and whether there is a two-tier justice system has been very prominent in the last couple of weeks. We've had Robert Jenrick and Shabana Mahmood just really looking at the way in which judges were perhaps being encouraged to take certain circumstances into account as mitigating circumstances, which ended up making it look like that people from ethnic minorities, maybe women, different people would be judged differently depending on what those circumstances might be. And Suella Braverman is drawing attention to the fact that this particular lady in Southport sent her Suella Braverman calls it a crass tweet. It wasn't crass, it was actually dangerous. It was inciting people to potentially burn down the hostels where asylum seekers were staying. And I think we have to recognise that the context that summer last year, which was so febrile, it needed to be to be taken into account, not just the mitigating circumstances of the individual concerned. So what you've got here is a story about someone saying that actually you did this bad thing, you did this thing which was potentially very inflammatory and potentially very lethal, but somehow we ought to give you some mitigating circumstances as well. Whereas actually I think it's the context. We need to remember quite how volatile that situation was.
It's also
when so many people thought
there was a very interesting
had been a refugee
program on last week on women in prison. A fascinating program about how many women in this country, one for shoplifting, something very small. The prisons are full of women who shouldn't be in prison. And here is Suella defending one of them who actually incited such fear. I have spoken to migrant help groups in the area where all of this happened. And they said some of those asylum seekers really had a total mental collapse after that because they thought they were going to be burnt alive. And for Suella to step in this case, you know, it just makes you think, what is the motive here? If she said more women are in prison than should be and named her as one of them, I could go with it.
I'm afraid I feel that this is, I think the key word here is politicised.
Yeah.
And it
well, her
actually,
quote, Lucy Colney is a victim of the
yes, but
politicised two-tier
Suella
justice
Braverman is
system.
making the point that she thinks it's a politicised sentencing arrangement. I think this is Suella Braverman trying to make herself relevant again because she has seen how successful it has been for Robert Jenrick, who, of course, is also a member of the opposition. So you would argue that the opposition MPs haven't had as much oxygen as members of the cabinet. But suddenly, because of that debate about the sentencing guidelines and the way in which judges were perhaps being lent on to soften the sentences, I think she suddenly saw that and thought, oh, I need to get back in there because Robert Jenrick has actually had a lot of publicity around
well,
This is politically relevant. We've just got a quick minute.
It's really a first draft of application to be the leaders. Both of them want that.
Quick minute on the Grand National, front page of the Sunday Mirror. Rocket nicks it. This lovely story, keeping it in the family. Willie Mullins trained Nick Rockets and his son Patrick rode the winning horse.
We are just so downbeat, aren't we? So neither of us really like horse racing. It's not that we don't like it, we actually actively disagree with it. And I think Britain has a very complicated relationship with animals. The donkey sanctuaries, there's a donkey sanctuary that receives more charitable donations than the top 4 domestic violence charities in the UK put together. 214 horses died in horse racing incidents in 2024. And a lot of changes were made for this particular race, the start time, the height of the fences. But unfortunately, I just think it's a really cruel sport.
I think it's a terrible sport. And actually, because the Royals love horse racing and so on, it's got this respectability. And it's absolute cruelty to animals, and it should stop.
OK, we both agree on that. We will leave it there. Yasmin and Lucy, thank you very much for the moment. We're going to take a break. Coming up, allegations of spiritual abuse in the world's biggest youth Christian missionary group. More on that investigation from The Observer when we come back. Do stay with us.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power.
No freedom!
Sky News, the full story first. There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. Free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in.
Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous.
We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
The Premier League Running is live on NBC and Peacock as City Pride is on the line with a pair of iconic derbies.
It doesn't get any better.
Thursday, it's a London derby. Chelsea.
Beautiful goal from Chelsea.
Spurs.
What a game!
Then Sunday,
Brace yourself, Manchester, for the mother of all derbies.
United.
In the place!
City. The Premier League Run-In is live on NBC and streaming on Peacock.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back. You are watching the press previews. Still with me, Yasmin Alibhai-Brown and Lucy Beresford. Let's take a look first off in this section at the Observer front page. And this story about the world's biggest youth Christian missionary organisation. They're facing allegations of spiritual abuse and controlling behaviour from young people who say they were left traumatised, Lucy.
Yes, so it's the Observer that's actually been investigating this. Some of the claims go back over 20 years. And this Christian organisation, it's a missionary organisation. So they're hoping to train people who will go out and spread the word. But the word that they're spreading is that quite a lot of activity which most of us would consider to be fairly normal, they regard as utterly sinful. And therefore they've been trying to almost spiritualise that out of people, particularly homosexual thoughts and homosexual activity. So they're actually casting that at trying to promote the idea that that's something that could be cured, which is such an abhorrent idea. And to link it again as being somehow against God's will is really revolting. But if there are people listening who feel that way, I hope they would also argue that some of the other activity that this organisation thinks is abhorrent, such as sexual activity or pornography, which in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's just some of the porn that gets made, which is really atrocious. You know, some of these moral transgressions, I thought we'd consign that to the dustbin of history.
It's all going on. And, you know, in some communities, certainly in many Asian families, they use exorcism, terrible exorcisms if the young people say they're gay. And it's again, God is brought into all of this oppression, and it's a terrible thing. I've talked to victims. You know, they think that the devil's spirit is in them if they are gay, and they try and beat it out of them. So it's a horrible, horrible religious, kind of offence against people's sexuality.
And also it's targeting people at a very young age. You know, these people who are perhaps looking to do a gap year, for example. So we're talking late teens, very impressionable, brains are still developing, sexual orientation is perhaps also still under debate. And a lot of people, if they feel ashamed of where they're at, and if they're made to feel ashamed, which is specifically what this Youth Within a Mission, which is this organisation that seeks to train.
But just so their line, we get that out. They're saying that they're heartbroken by the claims and they're deeply committed to the safety and well-being of everyone in
Well, all I would say is good for the Observer for investigating it.
Let's move to the Times, and this a story that we've covered before. This is the family of Agnes Wanjiru, a 21-year-old mother killed in Kenya. They're taking legal action in an attempt to end what they're describing as the cover-up over the name of the British soldier suspected of her murder.
Yeah, I've been following this for years, actually, and really congratulations to the Sunday Times, because it's not the kind of story our media tends to cover. you know, an African woman in Africa, our soldiers, you know, all of this. And now they've taken the case to the Kenya High Court, and the army, according to this story, is still obfuscating, refusing to cooperate, refusing to recognise the validity of the court. And it, you know, I just find that extraordinary that if it was the other way, if a white English girl had this experience with black soldiers from some African countries, how would we behave? Just seems so wrong for the army to be behaving in this way, if this story is correct. But I totally trust the Sunday Times on it.
Okay.
I do.
We must leave it there only because of time. Thank you both for the moment. Let's take a look at the weather for you now.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, high pressure will ensure that the weather remains settled over the coming days. However, a subtle shift in position will bring cooler conditions and then greater amounts of cloud for eastern counties. It'll be a chilly start to the day with the risk of auroral frost from the Midlands northward. Low cloud from the North Sea will affect the northeast for a time, but this will burn back to coastal regions through the morning.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.